Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, lovely people. Welcome back to Minnie's Mental Health. How are you? Where are you? Around the world, where are you watching me from? I'd like to thank you sincerely and kindly for joining me on another video today. So, as promised, I am going to continue on this journey of parenting through the ages. So, that's the name of my series. Part 1, my last video I just shared an overview of the different type of generations using common classifications. So I started with the silent generation. So just to summarize, that the silent generation are individuals that were born from the 1920s to 1940s, and specifically from 1924 to 1946. So I had the privilege today after church, because the church brethren, pardon me, are from varying ages, backgrounds, which I think is a blessing, in my opinion, in general, not just for my series here. So I spoke to one of the elders. His name is Bill. Bill is English, and he was born in the 1940s, basically. So he is part of the silent generation. So I just asked him to please just share about how his experience of growing up. So he told me that he was born just after the war had finished, and he grew up knowing the value of hard work. He told me that food was rationed at that time, that even in his family, although his mom and dad both worked, they raised them to sort of not waste food, to be very resourceful. He told me as well that his dad was working in a factory, that were helping to kind of make equipment that the soldiers were using for war, and that the sort of house that he grew up in, it was more communal. So it's like he was more friendly and knew his neighbors more, the children from the community. Did I mention that Bill's English? Yes, he is English. So he grew up here in England. Yes, and he also told me that at school, they expected them to be very academic, very disciplined, that if there were children that were wayward, basically, that they would get corporal punishment. I was a bit stunned. I was like, oh, sincerely, Bill said yes. He remembers, children being lined up, and if they did something like maybe like smoking outside of the school, the teacher would come up with a cane and they would get caned like on their hands. I was like, oh, I mentioned to him that I thought that was like probably like my African sort of grandparents, for example, parents, even, how they grew up. I didn't know that even here in England, he said yes. And another thing I will add as well, because I sort of started asking these questions before I started the series. So there were also some women, some ladies from my church that are all English, that I asked as well. And they're from a generation coming, but I think this sort of started in the silent generation. Here in England, I'm not, so I can't talk for other European countries. There was sort of a precedence for people to have male children. Yes. Sadly, one of the ladies that spoke to me from my church, she said that her sort of parents were not happy that she was a female, so they kind of gave her away for adoption because she was a female. Oh, I that really shocked me. And then the other ladies agreed that yes, it was actually a major stigma if families had females rather than males. And I always used to think, oh, this is an African thing, like this African pride that, have male children in my family, they'll continue on the heritage. But clearly, it also happened or existed or still exists, I suppose, in Europe. Then, after speaking to Bill, I then had a semi-interview with one of the aunties from my church, and she's a Nigerian lady. She's definitely from the silent generation, and she's turning 90 by the mercies of God very soon. So yes, so she told me that she grew up in Nigeria, specifically Anambra State. She said that Nigeria was a very prosperous country at the time, that they didn't have all these challenges with the economy. Growing up, she said that her dad had a very prestigious role in the church, that he was well respected, and her family was a family that was held in honor. So because her dad was kind of like a philanthropist, he did so many good things in the community. So she was well respected. She said she has good memories, childhood memories of playing outside. The economy was good. Both her parents worked. She told me that she's one of 9 siblings, and they grew up in a peaceful home. So she also told me that, of course, being Nigerian, like, there was an emphasis on education, academic excellence, and just being the best that you can be. I suppose this generation of children, they would have been expected to be excellent, especially academically, because if you think of the economical factors that they were sort of born under, from the 1940s, that was just after World War II. So, of course, here in England, for example, they needed people that would then start rebuilding the nation. So you obviously had to have like architects, engineers, people that basically would contribute to rebuilding England after World War II. And so in Nigeria as well, there was the Biafran War, which was kind of like, the way I understand is like the tribal war, basically, between the Igbos and the Yorubas. So I'm sure like there was a lot of damage that was done, and after that war, children were sort of trained and raised to sort of like take pride in their cultural heritage, but also to work hard. So one thing I do know, and I've done my research as usual, this is what I enjoy research anyway, is that in this generation, children were kind of that expression of children are raised to be seen and not heard. That was this generation, the silent generation. That's why hence why it's called the silent generation, because children just had to be there to obey, never to talk back. I don't think if you talk to, like, for example, your grandparents, if they were from that generation, or your great grandparents, they'll tell you that this talking back of a thing, they would never do it, because they had a high opinion of their parents. They had a high sort of respect and kind of like reverence for their parents, so they'd never talk back. Whereas, I don't know if you've talked to a toddler recently. Well, I do that every day. That's part of my job. So yes, they will tell you left, right, and center. like whether you're an adult or you're not an adult. So, but anyway, just making a very like a parallel sort of comparison. This generation definitely had a high respect, high value for hard work, consistency. Some people said as well, and researchers and psychologists say that a lot of the generation, the parents of this generation, sort of were not able to they were not able to express love and affection. Like, it was more sort of discipline and correction and, you know, kind of consistency that they expressed to the children, and kind of showing them that they love them, not really telling them, because that's how they grew up. So yes, so anyway, are you from the silent generation? I'm sure I have some of my viewers. Are your parents or grandparents from the silent generation? What are their experiences, or what are your experiences if you're watching and you're from the silent generation? What are your experiences of growing up? And in effect, how did that shape or influence your parenting? So we'll continue. So if I'm not mistaken, the next generation coming up is Generation X. So I look forward to your, most importantly, your comments, your thoughts, your perspectives, your likes, your shares, and your subscriptions. Thank you in advance for them. And see you on my next video. Bye.